second part of Chapter 4 here. Welfare impacts of a tariff and the arguments that people give that support tariffs. And I'll give you some counter-arguments to those as we go along. So, how do tariffs work? There's a bunch of ways that economists have of measuring social welfare, how we kind of measure our economic well-being. We've talked about indifference curves as one of those, community indifference curves in particular, and how when those push out to the upper right in the graph, we reach a higher level of social welfare. But there's other ways that are more direct of measuring economic well-being. One of those is with this measure we call total surplus. Now, you learned about this in principles, most likely, but I need to review it quickly here for the purposes of this lecture. And you need to understand first and foremost that total surplus is a dollar measurement of economic value. So it's kind of a dollar value of our economic well-being. As opposed to community indifference curves, which were a measurement of social welfare through utility, which is a little more esoteric, a little more difficult to define, but you guys all understand dollars. So we're going to measure our economic well-being in terms of dollars with total surplus. What you want in an economy is more total surplus. The more total surplus, the more social welfare, the higher our standard of living. So the question is, where does total surplus come from? Well, total surplus comes from ultimately any economic transaction that you engage in. When you go to the gas station today to fill up with gasoline after class, you're going to give them, $50, and they're going to give you a tank of gas. That's a voluntary economic transaction that you're engaging in. Why? Because you would rather have the tank of gas than the $50, and they would rather have the $50 than the $15 or 15 gallons of gas that you just bought. So who benefits from that trade? Well, you both do. Otherwise, what would one of you voluntarily have done? You would have pulled out. You would not have engaged in that trade. So every time you buy something, both you benefit and the person selling benefits. Now, it doesn't always feel that way, does it? If your car breaks down, sometimes if your car breaks down, you got to go pay $1,000 to get it fixed. You feel like the mechanic is benefiting from your misfortune. That's the way it feels, but here's the kicker. You don't have to get your car fixed. You are choosing voluntarily to fix your car when you go in there and give them $1,000. Because what would you rather have? A working car than $1,000. Otherwise, what would you keep? You keep your money. So even though it feels bad, what you're feeling bad about is the fact that you have to buy something that you didn't want to buy. But now you want to buy it. And actually, if you think about it, when you get your car fixed, you feel better after it's fixed, don't you? You kind of have that, okay, I didn't want to have to do that, but I chose to do it because it was better for me to do this, and now my car's back and running better, and I feel better. So sometimes we feel the misfortune of an accident or of the car breaking down, and we kind of confuse that with the purchase. But the purchase is voluntary. You don't have to do it. You can walk your ass all over town all day long if you want to. You can ride a bike. If you don't have one, you can steal one. Everybody else does. You ever had a bike stolen from them? My life is a history of bikes being stolen from me. I've only recovered one of them, and they got stolen again. I've had one bike stolen twice. That's traumatic. The first bike I had stolen, I was in the 5th grade, and I rode my dad's brand new 10-speed bike to school. And I either forgot to lock it up or I didn't lock it up very well. And I went out and it was just gone. I was like, that sucks. And someone stole my kid's bike, but I found him. He was riding along the side of the road, and I jumped out of my car and tackled him. And I hope he hears this. I hope he's one of my students, because I got you and I got my bike back. He's like, what the heck? I said, that's my bike. And then that bike got stolen again. I think he came right back and got it, and then I didn't find him the second time, so he won. That's okay. It's only a $20 bike. Okay. Welfare analysis of a tariff. So we use total surplus. Total surplus is comprised of two component parts: producer surplus and consumer surplus. So whenever you voluntarily buy something, both you get surplus as the consumer surplus, and the producer gets surplus called producer surplus. Don't confuse producer surplus with profits. Sometimes they're the same thing, but they're not necessarily the same thing. And it just so happens to be the case, let me draw this for you, that you can do this on a graph. Our old friend, the demand curve, illustrates the market's willingness to pay for each successive unit of something. In essence, a demand curve is a willingness to pay curve. This is the value that people put on things. So for instance, if this is for a gallon of milk, what's a gallon of milk cost? $3. You say $2.99, $3? Say $3. Why do you buy a gallon of milk for $3? According to my economics logic up here. Well, the answer is because it provides more value to you than the $3 does. How much more? Well, that depends on your maximum willingness to pay for a gallon of milk. If you really love milk, how much are you willing to pay? What's the top dollar you would pay for a gallon of milk? $5, $6, $7 if you love milk. If you don't love milk, it might be $1. In which case, if milk is $3 and your maximum willingness to pay is $1, what are you going to do? Not buy the milk. But what if you're vitamin D deficient and you really love the taste of milk and the doctor said, you got to have more milk, you're going to die? How much do you value milk? Would you be willing to pay $10 for it? Now, no one's really willing to pay $20 for a gallon of milk. So if the price were $20, how many units would sell? Zero. So in order to get more people to buy it, what would have to happen to the price? Yeah, as you bring down the price, what happens? More and more people buy it. What's happening? Well, you're getting down below your threshold. When the price drops below your threshold, what do? You buy it, and you're that next unit that's purchased. So that's basically a schedule, an outline of our willingness to pay for milk. At a really low price, everybody will buy it. Well, you can actually add that price line in. Let's say this is the $3 value, and you're the person up here that values it at about $5. Well, what do you get? $2 of consumer surplus. There's your $2 of consumer surplus. But notice there's other people also that are buying milk, some getting less surplus than you, some getting more, and you add all that up and it just shades in that area. And that area is the consumer surplus for the market. What happens if the price of milk falls from $3 down to $2? What happens to consumer surplus? It increases by that little shaded amount down there. What happens if the price goes up? Yeah, you lose. It takes all that surplus away from us. So what happens when the price of gasoline goes up? You still buy it, but do you feel as good about it? That's a reduction in your consumer surplus. You actually feel it. It's tangible. It's something you can feel in your gut. What happens when the price of gasoline is lower? Actually, when I got back from my travels this summer, I was kind of oblivious. I hadn't bought gasoline in a month, and because I was over there, and hadn't even seen gas stations in a month. Because apparently people in other countries don't have cars. And I get back, and all of a sudden I'm like, what is a gallon of gas? And I thought, in my mind, I had it kind of around $2.60, $2.70, but it was $2.15, $2.13. And I was like, oh man, I got this burst of consumer surplus I was not expecting. And it was kind of a pleasant feeling. Yeah, felt some more here. Okay. 10 years from now, the people will be watching this lecture online, and gasoline will be $5 a gallon, and be like, man, these guys are old.
Gas was $2 a gallon?
Actually, I bet it'll still be pretty cheap. Why? Why 10 years from now will gas still be pretty cheap?
More electric cars.
Yeah, probably more electric cars. That's my guess. That's our prediction for the future. You guys in the future can fact check us on that. You can do the same thing for producer surplus. Let me just quickly draw it for you, and you'll see this immediately how this works. The producer surplus has to do with the supply curve. There's an upward sloping supply curve, and there's your price line. And guess what this area here is? That's your producer surplus. There's your producer surplus. And what happens if the price goes up? From price 1 up to price 2? What happens to producer surplus? Yeah, it increases, but if the price goes down, the producers lose. So just like you feel good when you get more consumer surplus, firms feel good when they get more producer surplus. Firms feel bad when they get less producer surplus. You feel bad when you get less producer surplus. And that's that, again, back to that car negotiation. What are we really negotiating over there? Who's going to end up smiling at the end of this transaction? By the way, there's some advice. I heard this a long time ago when I first started buying cars. If you're buying a car and the guy who you're buying it from smiles and shakes your hand when the deal is complete, pull your hand away. You do not want the guy selling your car to you to be happy, do you? How do you want him to sell you that car? You want him to hate you by the time you buy that car, and you want a begrudging handshake. You want to see him angry at you. If they like you at the end of that deal, you have not gotten a good deal. If a car dealer's smiling, don't shake his hand. Wait till he's broken the smile. I had a friend who was really good at this, and he was able to, he would do all the stuff and get the coupons and get all the dealer rebates and all that kind of stuff. And he would negotiate the price acting like he didn't know all that stuff. And all of a sudden, once he got the price, he said, okay, now I want this and I want this. And when I first got here, you said you'd fill up the tank of gas for me and free oil changes for 3 years. I think you said that also. Let's get that down here. I mean, you'd see the guy just like, wow, you never defeat car dealers. They know what they're doing. This guy could do it. I'm not that good. All my car dealers seem to be pretty happy when I leave. Oh well. I don't practice what I preach. So be it. Okay, so what do we see in the market? Both of these things come together. There's the supply of something, there's the demand for something, and the market determines the price right here, right? On P star. And we know that this area up here is the consumer surplus. And this area down here in red is the producer surplus. And you add those together, and you get your total surplus. All right, that's a quick and dirty lesson on consumer and producer surplus. What we say is that the market maximizes total surplus, and that's the combined consumer and producer surplus. All right, where does that leave us? Well, now we need to consider what happens with imports. And to do that, we need to look at our price, our quantity, our zero. Let's talk about the market for bed sheets. I'm in the market for a new mattress right now, and there's an online mattress company called Casper. Has anybody bought a Casper mattress?
No, but I've
Heard good things about them? I might be in this. Also, Purple is a rival company. I heard an article, I heard a podcast thing on them, and it was interesting. So, if you don't know, it's supposed to be like a great bed, but they're like, your king size is $950 for the mattress, and it comes in a box. They deliver it to your house in a box, and it's foam, so you open it up and it kind of fills up. It's compressed when you get.
You get the truck for like a year for free.
100 days. They give 100 days to sleep on this thing, and if you don't like it, you can send them that grimy, nasty mattress back, and they'll give you your money back. It's a good marketing campaign. What if you can just keep buying them and keep returning them every 100 days? If I need a new email address each time. So this is the mattress, or this is not the mattress industry. Well, let's think about bed sheets. That's something I'll have to buy for my new mattress because I need those king, and they make sheets also there, and they make pillows. And they're supposed to have perfected the bed so that you sleep really, really well. We'll see. I heard the foam mattresses can get a little hot though, a little toasty. How much does a set of bed sheets cost? Anybody have an idea? Oh man, what do you sleep on, sandpaper? Let's go for thread count. Let's live large here. Let's actually get the 600 thread count. Egyptian cotton bed sheets. All right, let's have a good night's sleep here. Not those Walmart specials. 100 thread count that you're talking about. Fishnet. We're talking a tight weave here. I mean, really good stuff. Now, a set of bed sheets, I'm sure that's probably a reasonable price for bed sheets at this point, but it doesn't fit with my example, so I'm going to go $60 for a king-size set of bed sheets, high quality. Here's the deal. This graph, so all of our supply and demand graphs, you may not have actually realized this when we talk about it. This is an example of a market for, in this case, bed sheets. Technically, this is the domestic market, meaning these are the U.S. consumers for bed sheets, or we might define the market as the Middle Georgia market for bed sheets, in which case this is the Middle Georgia demand for bed sheets, and this is the supply of bed sheets in the Middle Georgia market. So this is kind of either a local or domestic take on the market. Let's say this is the U.S. market for bed sheets, and on average, the price of a new set of bed sheets of a decent quality is $60. This is a circumstance where we're talking about an isolated economy where there's no imported bed sheets. This is a closed economy. This is that situation, autarky, where we're in isolation and we're not allowed to trade with anybody else because this is just a single sole market here. Now, the question is, what if we do open up this economy and we allow imported bed sheets? I'm going to guess that bed sheets made in foreign countries are cheaper than the ones that would be made if we were only isolated in the U.S. And let's just, for the sake of argument, say that that in fact is true, and that the world price, meaning what the rest of the world is currently trading bed sheets at, is $40. All else being equal, and we got to be careful with this, if you're looking at bed sheets, assuming you're comparing the quality and the quality is the same, you're looking at the style and the patterns and styles are both equally acceptable to you. Many times people make this argument that there's some kind of virtue in buying American over buying foreign, buy the USA, made in the USA, that kind of thing. That's a marketing campaign. It's not basic economic theory. It's just people saying, we want you to buy our stuff rather than our competitor stuff, so buy USA because guess where ours are made? In this country. So it's kind of a marketing ploy. But technically speaking, as much as that may be appealing to you, as much as you may have been led to believe that there's some virtue in buying American over buying imports, your behavior does not really support that idea. Because as much lip service as we give to buying made in the USA, most of the time when you or I buy things, guess what? We ignore where it's made. We don't even look. We've gotten accustomed, I just know if I look on certain things, they're made in China. These sunglasses, as nice as they may be, it tends to be the case that as much as we talk about buying USA, most of us don't actually check that. Many times, even if we do check it, we don't necessarily have an option to buy American. They're either all imported or they're all made here or whatever, and you don't have that option in the first place. So the point is this, all else being equal, you see two sets of bed sheets. Some that are priced at $60, which is what the U.S. manufacturers have to sell them at to continue making money like they're accustomed to, versus the newly imported bed sheets that are the exact same quality and everything else for $40. What are you doing? I know you don't like to pay much more than $15 for yours, so I'm guessing you're going to lean towards the $40 pair, and so are the rest of us, actually. I'm not just picking on you for being cheap. All of us are that way. So the point is, at $40, if you look at the demand curve, that's the quantity of bed sheets that we demand at $40. People who are not willing to or able to buy them at $60 are willing and able to buy them more frequently, at least at $40, and that's the quantity that's actually demanded. But what about the supply side, the producers? At $40, we don't want to sell as many. That's the quantity supplied. So if you look at if the market now settles at $40 because nobody's paying $60 anymore, U.S. firms move back down along the supply curve. And what does that mean, to move down along the supply curve? To making a lower quantity of bed sheets. What does that mean for bed sheet manufacturing facilities and the jobs that go along with those facilities? Yeah, they're going away. Now notice that we still are producing some domestic bed sheets. So which firms have survived this decrease in price? Well, it's the firms that were the most efficient, those that were willing and able to sell them at a cheaper price. But what about the less efficient firms that were supplying those at a higher price? Well, they just can't compete at that price. And we kind of want those firms going out of business, don't we? If you're going to choose which firms to annihilate, do you want the most efficient gone or the least efficient gone? In a world of scarcity, I want the least efficient to be pushed out of the market. But notice that at $40 there's a problem, because let's say, for the sake of argument, we're only making 4,000 bed sheets in this country a year at $40, but we demand 10,000 bed sheets. What's the problem there? We're 6,000 bed sheets shy of what we want. So where do we get those from? Again, this is free trade, world markets, da-da-da-da-da. What are we doing? We're importing those. So that difference, 6,000 units, are our imports. See the imports there? And that, once again, with our 4,000 units produced domestically and our 6,000 units imported, at 10,000 units, supply and demand are now equated again right at this point. And the market's in balance, the market's in equilibrium. There's no shortage or excess of bed sheets. Notice something. Instead of shading in these areas, I'm going to put letters A, B, C, and D. See those areas that those letters represent? I can now ask you very straightforward questions, such as, when bed sheets were still at $60 and we were not importing any, what was our consumer surplus? Consumer is A up here, right? It's the area between the demand curve and the price line, like those graphs I shaded in earlier. What was producer surplus at $60? B and C. When the price now has fallen because of imports down to $40, what's consumer surplus?
A and B.
And? D. A, B, and D, all of it. And what's producer surplus? Just C. What have the producers lost? They've lost B. What have the consumers gained? B and D. Notice that the gains to the winners are greater than the losses to the losers. I've said this before, and now I'm proving it to you. Because whenever we have a lower world price than the equilibrium domestic price, there is going to be an incentive to import them. And whether it's a lot lower price or a little bit of a lower price, you're always going to have a situation where the gains to the winners exceed the losses to the losers. There is more economic value at $40 than there was at $60. But who doesn't care about this economic logic? Who's losing here? And the producer. The gains to the winners are exceeding the losses to the losers, but the losers don't want to lose. What would they rather bed sheets be selling at? And they want to get back up that way. So what do? They go up to Washington, D.C., to the representatives, and what do they lobby for?
Tariffs.
A protective tariff. Because what's that going to do to the price? It's going to push it back up more to where they like it. It's going to make those imported bed sheets less competitive, make our domestic firms more competitive. On whose shoulders? On whose back? On the U.S. consumer's back. So let's say that they do that, and they actually get a $10 tariff enacted. What that's going to do is it's going to effectively raise the price that consumers pay from $40 up to $50. And at $50, two things happen. One thing is, consumers don't want as many bed sheets as they did previously. We move back up along the demand curve, back along the demand curve that way. But notice where we're moving on the supply curve. At $50, we are willing and able to supply more. And what does that mean to move up the supply curve? If moving down meant we were closing down factories and losing jobs, what does moving up it mean? We're protecting those jobs. We're saving those. We're bringing those jobs back. So let's say you're running for office in a district where you have a lot of factories like this. Guess what you're going to promise them for their votes? Tariff. Of course you are. And whose interest is that? It's in your interest? It's in their interest? What about the consumers? No, they're the ones paying for this policy. But remember earlier in the last lecture, I asked you about how much you were paying in tariffs and nobody really knew? And I asked you if it's on your receipt that you were paying a 70% tariff on rubber boots to protect the rubber boot industry that doesn't even exist anymore? Remember all that talk? If you don't know you're paying tariffs, guess what? That gives them free rein. And as a result, we have 1,711 pages of these damn things. Because who's not complaining about them? You aren't. And I'm not. And here's the kicker. Now that you know this, you're still not going to do anything about it. Because it's not worth it to you. $10 on a set of bed sheets. If that's the actual example, if that's a real world case, are you going to spend time, an hour to write a letter to your congressman complaining about this to get $10 on a set of bed sheets that you're probably going to buy for a while anyways? No. You're not going to mess with it. So it turns out that the costs of a tariff are diluted among a lot of people that are apathetic, that don't really care. But who receives the benefits? Yeah, a select few in that industry are receiving. And what is the benefit to them? Is it just $10? No, it's getting a job back. So who's the squeaky wheel here? The firms are the squeaky wheel. Who's getting all the oil? They are. But we're the ones that are just kind of going along fine and don't worry about it. So it's this divergence that you have in motivation here. As consumers, we're not motivated to do anything about it because the numbers just don't work for us. But collectively, how much are we paying for these? If you've got 300 million Americans all paying $10, that's $3 billion that's coming out of the economy. It's a huge chunk of money. It's a huge reduction in our social welfare collectively for a little bit of benefit over here. But notice those receiving the benefit are going to be loud and vocal about it. We say that the benefits are concentrated in a few, whereas the costs are spread out among many. And that's why these things persist. And that's why to this day we're still paying 70% tariff on imported rubber boots, even though the squeaky wheels are no longer there. Even though those who lobbied to get these things many years ago have long gone away. They're not even arguing for it anymore, but we're so apathetic, it just stays there. $7 for a pair of rubber boots, so what? I'm not going to waste any time on it. It's kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts, because even though $7 for a pair of rubber boots or $10 for a pair of a set of bed sheets doesn't matter to you, $3,000 a year matters to you. And that's what you're paying collectively in all these things. But that would be 10,000 different letters that you'd have to write. And you'd have to oppose 10,000 different lobbying groups who are all fighting to keep those things in place. So you're not going to do it. Kind of the tragedy of these things. Let me finish this, though, because here's the way I want to go with this. Actually, let me get rid of those arrows and draw this. Notice we were importing, I don't want to make this too cluttered, we were importing 6,000 units before the tariff, but now that the tariff has effectively raised the price, look at what the imports have done. They've been cutting about, that's almost a third, they're about down to 2,000. Tariffs have been reduced from, imports have been reduced from 6,000 units to 2,000. That's why we call these things trade restrictions. They restrict trade. They reduce the amount that we import. Or trade barriers, because they block trade. Now we got a bunch of shapes and areas here. Let me see. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. And what we need to do is go through and talk about all these little areas here. I gotta get your test back here also. Again, we can kind of go back to the beginning, and at that $60 price, we can ignore all this stuff over here. At the very, very beginning, we had area A. That's not a very good A, is it? It's a worse A. Yeah, better A. Area A was consumer surplus, B, C, and D now represent producer surplus, and total surplus was A, B, C, D. Then we moved to an open economy where the world price dropped us down to $40, at which point consumer surplus is everything up top, A, B, C, E, F, G, and H. And at that point, what's producer surplus? It's just area D. And that was from the previous graph, area C, if you're keeping score at home. So now we have all of this consumer surplus, but we have this very limited producer surplus. And what do the producers get together and do? They get that tariff put in place. So to continue the story, we move up now to this price. And now, consumer surplus is just ABE. So what have consumers lost? They've lost C, F, G, and H. But what have the producers gained? They've only gained area C. They had D, now they have D and C. So C changes hands, but look what's lost. F, G, and H goes away. So engaging in free trade increased value. Guess what restricting it's going to do? It's going to go the other way. It's going to decrease it, and it's going to hurt consumers more than it helps producers. So with tariffs, you can't argue that there's net gains. With tariffs, the gains to the losers outweigh the losses, or the losses to the losers outweigh the gains to the winners. And that's not a very good public policy choice. If there's more harm than good, don't do it. It's a basic criteria for making a decision. You've used it your whole life. No, that's not true. You violate that every now and then, don't you? Doing shots at 3 in the morning after you're already drunk, that's probably not a good decision. Why are you making that decision? Because you're not thinking rationally, right? So don't do that. Most of our decisions, though, are net gains. Otherwise, we wouldn't do them. So the question is, what are these areas? As we go from the world price up to because the effect of the tariff is moving us from here effectively up to there. And that means that consumers lose C, F, G, and H, and producers only gain C, and there's this loss of F, G, and H. We need to talk about these areas because this is the critical zone here. This is where everything's going on. And because of it, we say that area C has a name. It's the redistributive effect of the tariff. So the redistributive effect of the tariff is area C was consumer surplus, now it's producer surplus. And that's what tariffs do. They redistribute income, they redistribute surplus from consumers to producers. And we can measure that with area C. But that's not all the losses. Consumers also lose F and H. F and H look kind of the same, don't they? They're little triangles there, but they're on opposite sides of this area G. So F is what we call, both of those, F and H, are called deadweight loss. And deadweight loss is inefficient. It's just this lost surplus. It's just gone. It just vaporizes into thin air. F is what we call the protective effect of the tariff, and H is called the consumption effect of the tariff, and you've got to memorize those. Redistributive effect, F and H are collectively deadweight loss. F specifically is the protective effect, and H is the consumption effect. And then that leaves, what is area G? G is part of the change that's happening here. But where does G go? And you can actually figure this out logically once you wrap your brain around this graph and know what's going on, which is going to take a little studying to get this. But let's look at it. G is a rectangle, and since the 3rd grade, you've known how to calculate the area of a rectangle. The length times the width, or the base times the height. Which one is it? I think it's length width. There's the length, there's the width, or there's the base, there's the height, whichever one you want to use. What's the length of this rectangle? 2,000. What is that? It's 2,000 imports, right? What's the height of that rectangle?
$10.
$10, which is what? It's the tariff. So that's $10 collected on each of 2,000 imports. That's what a tariff is. It's a tax on an import. If we're importing 2,000 units, we're collecting $10 on each. That's $20,000, and who gets the tax revenue? That's government revenue. So G is the government revenue from the tariff. So who wins from a tariff? 2 players.
The producers
And the government. Who were the 2 that made this policy up in the first place? Who's the losers in all this? Are they at the table? No. This will happen all the time. Because consumers never have a seat at that table. Because we don't honestly want it. It's not worth our time and effort because we have nothing to gain from this. But we do have a little bit to lose, and collectively we have a lot to lose. And you can add up those losses. Here's the kicker about government revenue. Technically, have we lost the government revenue as a community, as a society? No, it's still in the bank. The government gets it. It's just money that's transferred out of consumers' pockets to the government. And I mentioned earlier, that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are reasons why we do that. We need the government services. There's public parks and things like that that we want the government to provide for us, specifically roads, things like that. So government spending, this kind of comes back to us. Now, technically, the government's very inefficient at spending your money. You tend to get about 40 to 60 cents on the dollar. So basically, when the government takes the dollar and spends it for you, you get about 40 to 60 cents worth of value. When you spend a dollar of your own money, how much value do you get? At least, right? You can get more. You can buy a Ferrari for $1, not very frequently, but if you could, you get a ton of value for $1. You always get at least, if you don't get at least 100% on the dollar, what are you going to do? You're going to keep your dollar. So you've got to be careful about that. But let's just assume that we do get 100% of that back. That's not lost. So what do consumers lose? C, F, and H. Now, consumers aren't going to get all that value back. Producers will get some of it also, because who benefits from the roads?
Everybody.
Everybody, producers and consumers. So that kind of goes back to everybody. So let's just ignore that. As long as it's there, I don't care. I don't care that C is the redistributive effect. Yes, it's coming out of consumers' pockets and going to producers, but it's still part of the economy. It's still part of total surplus. And what are those producers going to do with that? They're going to spend that money somewhere. So it's going to keep circulating through the economy. It's just moving from one pocket into another pocket. But consumers lose C, consumers lose F, and consumers lose H. What are consumers paying for? A small movement up along the supply curve, which means a few jobs we're getting back. And you can do that math. You can calculate the total cost to consumers, divide that by the number of jobs saved, and then you can figure out how much it costs per job saved. And that's a good metric to know, right? If I'm going to tell you, I'm going to save a job using your money, what should your next question be? How much? How much more money are you going to take for this? At what cost are you going to save this job? And if I said a penny, what would you say? Yeah, do it. That's no sweat. What if I told you per job saved is going to cost about $500,000? And the job that we're saving is a manufacturing job at a factory. Should we spend $500,000 to save a $30,000 a year job? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Yet, that's about how the numbers work out when you use a tariff to save a job. So that brings us to these arguments. Are tariffs a good deal or not? Well, you may have guessed what the answer is going to be there. I got to finish up here. Quickly, there are some arguments. Let me do these in 5 minutes here. Just run through these real quickly for you. People who argue for tariffs argue, here's why we should do this. Even though the costs are phenomenally high, they don't tell you that part. Ignore the costs. Here's the benefits. Matter of fact, if you're going to sell something to someone, what do you want to ignore? Yeah, you want to ignore the negatives and accentuate the positives, right? So what are the positives, supposedly, when it comes to tariffs? First, we're going to save jobs with these tariffs. I just mentioned at what cost should be your first question. And right there, end of discussion. This is way too expensive to save a job. If you had a $50,000 a year job, and it was at threat, and I said, I'm going to make these people pay $500,000 so that you can keep your $50,000 a year job. Can you think of a better suggestion that might resolve our little conflict here? How about they give you $100,000 to quit? Let's let the job go away and only spend a quarter of the money, a fifth of the money. That's cheaper, and you're both happy. Would you like $100,000 for doing nothing? Yeah. Would they rather pay $100,000 collectively than $500,000 to resolve your work issue? Yeah. So just charity is a cheaper solution. Just paying people not to work is a cheaper solution. Hell, with $500,000, we could send you back to Harvard. We can do all kinds of things. We can re-educate you and get you geared up for another job. Matter of fact, that's a pretty good solution we'll talk about later. You can actually compensate the losers, let free trade happen, let the jobs go away, but then free up some of these new resources that we're winning from free trade and use those to help train those workers and get them put into new jobs. It's a nice solution where everybody can win. We have to do stuff like that. I've had students in my class who were paid by the government because they lost their job due to free trade to come back to school. There's also the problem that when you don't have that $3,000 a year in your pocket, you don't go out to eat dinner as much. And what happens to some restaurant workers? They lose their jobs. So not only are we saving some jobs with tariffs? We're actually eliminating a bunch of others. And when you do the math, you end up losing more than you save in related industries. So that's a big kicker with it as well. So the job argument is the most common argument, but it's really the most dissected by economists. And any way you look at it, the jobs argument doesn't really hold up. It only holds up if you're one of the few fortunate ones whose job is saved. You're the only winner in the equation. Some people say we shouldn't import stuff because of cheap labor. Well, that's the whole point. Remember, China has a comparative advantage in the production of labor-intensive goods because they have an abundance of labor, which makes their labor cheaper. It's the source of their comparative advantage. Cheap labor is, yes, we should let them do it because they have that advantage. Denying them their comparative advantage makes us and them worse off. Fairness. Some people argue it's not fair because the other country is getting benefits that we're not. I won't get into that too much, but that's kind of a wimpy argument. It's like they're getting benefits that I'm not, so therefore we shouldn't do with them. If South Korea is subsidizing its steel industry so that we can get cheaper steel, who's benefiting from that cheaper steel? We are. Why do we want to cut that gravy train off? If their government is subsidizing their steel industry, they're using their taxpayer dollars to make their steel cheaper so we can have cheaper products. That's money flowing out of South Korean taxpayer pockets into U.S. pockets. I say we keep that gravy train going as long as possible. If anything, who's that unfair to? South Korean taxpayers. But if someone's taking other people's money and giving it to you, just keep your mouth shut, all right? Let it keep happening. Someone's digging their own grave, what do you do? If your enemies are digging their own grave, let them dig. Infant industry is a special case where you can argue that if industry is in its infancy, they need protection to grow up and then they can be more competitive. The only caveat to that argument is once they have grown up and they're competitive, you got to remove the trade restrictions. And what did I say about trade restrictions going away, such as the rubber boot tariffs? They don't tend to go away. So that's a rough argument for that reason. Finally, national security. Here's a great argument. Iran has the comparative advantage in their production of oil relative to the U.S. The U.S., relative to Iran, has the comparative advantage in the production of nuclear warheads. We should therefore be trading nuclear warheads with Iran for oil. Why is this a bad idea? Because Iran is part of the axis of evil, right? We don't like Iran, they don't like us, and we don't want to trade our nuclear secrets for their oil, even though the law of comparative advantage suggests we should, and we'd all be great. Do you see how the economic laws fall apart there for national security reasons? So there can be overriding national security reasons why we want to restrict trade with a country. But notice, at the end of the day, what do we want to restrict in this agreement? Do we want to restrict our access to their oil or their access to our nuclear secrets? Yeah, the latter, not the former. So it's not really a good argument for an import tariff. It's a good argument for an export restriction. That's usually the case with national security issues. We don't want other countries getting our stuff, but we're more than happy to take their stuff. So again, that doesn't serve as a good argument as an import trade restriction. All right, that's everything for these two chapters, for chapter 4.